Marcus Anderson dropped his phone, the device clattering against marble as his 7-year-old daughter collapsed beside the organic kale display. Emma's whispered words froze every shopper within earshot. "Daddy, I see Mommy in the soup, lady." The homeless woman wasn't digging for food. She was clutching a leather-bound recipe book like a lifeline. Whole Foods customers stepped back in horrified fascination as the tech billionaire knelt beside his unconscious child, her fever spiking dangerously. The woman emerged from shadows, her honey-blonde hair matted, holding the exact cookbook his grandmother Eleanor had written during the Great Depression. Emma's eyes fluttered open, focusing with unnatural clarity on the stranger's weathered hands. Those same hands that had once commanded five-star kitchens now trembled with hunger, yet moved with familiar grace around the worn pages. "Call 911!" Marcus commanded, though his gut whispered this was something medical science couldn't diagnose. Who was this woman? And why did his dying daughter recognize handwriting from a book that had vanished the day his wife Sarah died 2 years ago? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Marcus Anderson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 15th-floor penthouse, watching the snow-dust Central Park like powdered sugar on a dark cake. The silence pressed against him. Not the comfortable quiet of contentment, but the hollow echo of a house too large for two grieving hearts. Behind him, the marble kitchen gleamed untouched, its professional-grade appliances as pristine as the day they were installed. Sarah used to joke that they had enough cooking equipment to feed an army, but she was the only one who ever brought it to life. Now, 2 years after her funeral, the kitchen remained a museum to unused potential. "Daddy, I'm not hungry." Emma's voice drifted from the dining room where she sat before an untouched plate of Mrs. Patterson's carefully prepared dinner. At 7 years old, Emma had inherited her mother's delicate features and stubborn streak, but grief had hollowed her cheeks and dimmed the spark in her green eyes. Her eating disorder had the best pediatric psychiatrists in Manhattan baffled. She would only consume foods that tasted like mommy's love, a category that seemed to shrink daily. Dr. Patricia Hoffman's words echoed in Marcus's mind from their session earlier that afternoon. Emma is looking for her mother in food. Until she finds that connection, she'll continue to waste away. The irony wasn't lost on him. Surrounded by abundance, his daughter was slowly starving. Marcus turned from the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. At 35, he commanded a tech empire worth nearly $1 billion, yet he couldn't solve the simple problem of getting his child to eat. FoodLink, his revolutionary app connecting restaurants with customers, had transformed how America ordered meals. The platform served millions daily, but he couldn't serve one proper dinner to the person who mattered most. The penthouse itself told the story of his success and isolation. Architectural Digest had featured it twice. Soaring ceilings, imported Italian marble, museum-quality art that Sarah had selected during happier times. Every surface spoke of wealth and taste, but the rooms felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Emma's toys sat forgotten in corners, her artwork from school yellowing on the refrigerator beneath untouched groceries worth more than most families spent in a week. In the kitchen, a leather-bound cookbook sat on the marble island, his grandmother Eleanor's handwritten collection from the Great Depression. Sarah had treasured it during her final months, claiming the simple recipes held more healing power than any medication. She'd spent hours copying Eleanor's notes about feeding families when money was scarce, when love had to substitute for luxury ingredients. The book had disappeared from Mount Sinai Hospice the day after Sarah died, leaving Marcus with only photocopied pages that captured the words, but not the soul. "Daddy?" Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her school uniform, backpack dragging behind her like dead weight. "Can we go get groceries? Maybe if we buy different food, it'll taste right." Marcus knelt to her eye level, searching her face for any sign of the vibrant child she'd been before cancer stole her mother. "What kind of food, sweetheart?" "The kind that makes you feel like someone loves you." The December wind cut through Marcus's wool coat as he and Emma emerged from Whole Foods' Columbus Circle, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The therapy session with Dr. Hoffman had ended with another prescription for patience and another suggestion to keep trying different approaches. But Marcus felt no closer to reaching his daughter than he had 6 months ago. Emma walked beside him in silence, her small hand lost in his, her eyes scanning the sidewalk with the distant expression that had become her default since Sarah's death. They had spent 40 minutes in the grocery store, wandering aisles filled with organic produce and artisanal products that cost more than most families' weekly budgets. Emma had dutifully pointed to items: fresh basil, heirloom tomatoes, imported olive oil, but her selections felt mechanical, hopeful gestures toward foods that would likely remain untouched on expensive plates. The shopping cart had filled with ingredients for meals that would become tomorrow's guilt and waste. The first snowflakes began falling as they reached the corner of Columbus Circle, each flake catching the glow of early evening streetlights. Emma stopped walking, her grip tightening on Marcus's hand. "Daddy, it's snowing." Her voice carried a tremor he recognized, the sound of memory awakening unwanted emotions. "Mommy said angels make snow when they cry." Marcus knelt on the cold concrete, setting down their grocery bags to cup Emma's face in his hands. Her cheeks were already red from the wind, and tears had begun forming in the corners of her eyes. The first snowfall since Sarah's funeral was triggering the cascade of associations he'd been dreading all week. Weather had become an enemy in their house. Rain reminded Emma of hospital windows, sunshine felt wrong without Mommy to enjoy it, and snow brought back the day they'd buried Sarah beneath a white blanket of grief. "Angels aren't crying, sweetheart," he said, brushing snowflakes from her dark hair. "They're just redecorating heaven." The words felt inadequate even as he spoke them, another well-meaning lie in a growing collection of phrases designed to cushion reality's sharp edges. But Emma's expression didn't change. She continued staring at the falling snow with the intensity of a child searching for messages from the beyond. Behind them, the Whole Foods dumpster area caught Marcus's attention peripherally, a movement that seemed out of place against the backdrop of affluent holiday shoppers hurrying past with their organic groceries and imported wines. He turned slightly, still comforting Emma, and saw a figure hunched over the large waste container behind the store. The person moved with careful deliberation, not frantically like someone desperate, but methodically, as if following a familiar routine. Emma's tears had begun in earnest now, the snowflakes mixing with salt water on her cheeks. "I want Mommy," she whispered, the same 3 words that had broken Marcus's heart daily for 24 months. "I want her to make the snow stop being sad." Her small frame shook with sobs that seemed too large for her 7-year-old body, grief that had nowhere to go except inward, manifesting in her refusal to eat, to sleep peacefully, to engage with the world that had taken her mother away. Marcus gathered Emma into his arms, feeling the familiar helplessness that accompanied these moments. All his wealth, all his success, all his connections to the best doctors and therapists in Manhattan meant nothing when faced with a child's pure anguish. He'd built an empire by solving problems through innovation and persistence, but grief operated by different rules. It couldn't be purchased away or optimized into submission. The figure by the dumpster straightened, and Marcus caught a clearer glimpse, a young woman in a coat too thin for winter weather, her blonde hair escaping from beneath a knitted cap. She held something carefully against her chest, protecting it from the snow. Not food, he realized, but what appeared to be a book or journal, something she valued enough to shield with her body. Emma's sobs began to quiet, but her grip on his coat remained fierce. "Daddy, who's that lady?" she asked, following his gaze toward the woman by the dumpster. Her voice carried the curiosity that had been absent for months, a spark of interest in something beyond her own pain. "Is she looking for food?" The woman seemed to sense their attention and glanced in their direction. Even from a distance, Marcus could see she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps late 20s, with delicate features marked by exhaustion and wariness. When she saw them watching, she didn't run or hide. Instead, she stood perfectly still, like a deer calculating whether humans represented threat or possibility. "I think so, sweetheart," Marcus replied softly, his mind racing through possibilities and implications. Emma rarely showed interest in strangers anymore, but something about this woman had captured her attention in a way that seemed significant. The snow continued falling around them, creating a moment suspended between decision and consequence. Marcus felt Emma's grip loosen on his coat as her curiosity overcame her tears. The 7-year-old had barely shown interest in anything beyond her own grief for months, yet something about the woman by the dumpster had captured her attention with an intensity that surprised him. Before he could stop her, Emma broke free from his arms and took several steps toward the stranger, her small boots crunching in the fresh snow. "Emma, wait!" Marcus called, but his daughter had already closed half the distance between them and the woman. The stranger looked up from whatever she'd been examining in the waste container, and Marcus could see her face clearly now. She was indeed young, perhaps 28 or 30, with sharp cheekbones hollowed by obvious hunger, and eyes that held the particular wariness of someone who'd learned to expect disappointment from human encounters. "I'm not stealing," the woman said quickly, her voice carrying a practiced defensiveness. She clutched the object against her chest more tightly. Marcus could see now it was definitely a book, old and battered, with a leather cover that had seen better decades. "I'm just looking for food that's still good. I'm not causing trouble." Emma stopped just out of arm's reach, tilting her head with the directness only children possess. "Are you hungry?" she asked, her voice clearer than it had been in weeks. "My daddy has lots of money. We could buy you real food." The woman's expression shifted from wariness to something softer, more vulnerable. She looked down at Emma with what appeared to be genuine surprise, as if kindness from a child was the last thing she'd expected on this cold December evening. That's very sweet of you," she said, her voice catching slightly. "But I'm okay. I just need to find something small." Marcus approached slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. Up close, he could see the woman's coat was not just thin, but expertly mended in several places, the kind of careful repairs that spoke of someone who valued what little they owned. Her blonde hair was clean but roughly cut, probably self-trimmed with whatever tools she could find. Despite her obvious hunger, she carried herself with a dignity that suggested this wasn't her natural state. She was someone who had fallen, not someone who had never risen. "Excuse me," Marcus said gently. "My daughter asked you a question. Are you hungry?" The woman's eyes flicked between Marcus and Emma, clearly calculating risks and possibilities. Her gaze lingered on Marcus's expensive coat, his Italian leather shoes, the Whole Foods bags that likely cost more than she'd seen in weeks. But instead of the desperation he might have expected, he saw something that looked almost like resignation. "I'm always hungry," she admitted quietly, "but I'm not looking for handouts. I'm just trying to find ingredients that are still good, things I can work with." "Work with?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious now. The woman hesitated, then opened the battered book slightly, revealing pages covered in hand-written text. "Recipes," she said, almost defiantly. "I used to cook, professionally. They're ways to make something good from things people throw away." Emma stepped closer, fascination overcoming her usual shyness with strangers. "Can I see?" Without waiting for permission, she peered at the open page. Her eyes widened as she read the faded handwriting. "That looks like Grandma Eleanor's writing," she said, looking up at Marcus with excitement. "Daddy, look at the letters. They're all curly like in Mommy's book." Marcus felt his breath catch. Emma was right. The handwriting did bear a striking resemblance to his grandmother Eleanor's distinctive script, with its elaborate loops and careful spacing, but that was impossible. Eleanor had died when he was 12, and her recipe collection had vanished from Mount Sinai the day after Sarah's death. There was no way this stranger could have anything connected to his family. "Where did you get that book?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral despite the sudden hammering of his heart. The woman's grip tightened on the leather cover. "It was given to me," she said carefully, "by someone who thought I needed it more than anyone else did." Her eyes met his directly for the first time. Someone who was dying, who wanted to make sure the recipes found their way to someone who would use them to help people. Emma's excitement was building visibly, her cheeks flushed with something other than cold for the first time in months. "What's your name?" she asked the woman. "I'm Emma, and this is my daddy, Marcus. We live in the big building over there." She pointed toward their penthouse tower. "Do you want to come see our kitchen? It has everything, but nobody ever cooks in it anymore because Mommy died, and Daddy doesn't know how to make food taste like love." The directness of Emma's words hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because they were untrue, but because they were devastatingly accurate. His daughter had just summarized their entire tragedy in one innocent sentence. They had every material advantage, but they'd lost the ability to transform ingredients into comfort, sustenance into love. The woman looked between them again, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. The wariness remained, but it was now mixed with what might have been recognition or understanding. "My name is Bella," she said softly, "Isabella Morgan. And I—" She paused, looking down at the recipe book, then back at Emma's hopeful face. "I used to know someone named Sarah. Someone who taught me that recipes aren't just about food, they're about taking care of people you love." The snow continued falling around them, creating a circle of intimacy in the busy Manhattan evening. Marcus felt as if he were standing at the edge of something significant, a moment that could change everything or nothing, depending on what he chose to do next. Emma solved his dilemma by reaching out and taking Bella's free hand with the unconscious trust only children possess. "Come home with us," she said simply. "You can show me how Mommy's recipes work. I haven't been able to eat anything that tastes right since she went to heaven." The elevator ride to the 15th floor passed in charged silence, with Emma maintaining her grip on Bella's hand while Marcus stood rigidly against the polished steel wall, second-guessing every aspect of this impulsive decision. He'd built his fortune on calculated risks and data-driven choices, yet here he was bringing a homeless stranger into his home based on nothing more than his daughter's intuition and a resemblance between handwriting styles. The rational part of his mind cataloged potential dangers, theft, manipulation, worse possibilities he didn't want to contemplate, but Emma's animated chatter provided a counterpoint to his anxiety. "You're going to love our kitchen," Emma was saying to Bella, her voice carrying more enthusiasm than Marcus had heard in months. "It has 6 burners and 2 ovens and a refrigerator that's bigger than most people's bedrooms. Mrs. Patterson says it's designed for professional chefs, but nobody ever uses it except to reheat takeout." Bella listened with the focused attention adults usually reserved for other adults, treating Emma's words as genuinely important rather than mere childhood prattle. "6 burners sounds like heaven," she replied softly. "I used to work in restaurants where we'd fight over stovetop space. What's your favorite thing to cook?" Emma's face fell slightly. I don't cook. I used to help Mommy sometimes, but after she got sick, we stopped doing that. Now I mostly just watch Daddy order food on his phone, but nothing ever tastes right. She looked up at Bella with desperate hope. Do you think you could make something that tastes like love? Doctor Hoffman says I need to find foods that remind me of Mommy, but I can't remember what her cooking actually tasted like anymore. The elevator opened into Marcus's penthouse foyer, revealing the stark elegance that Architectural Digest had featured twice. Bella stepped out slowly, her eyes taking in the soaring ceilings, imported marble floors, and carefully curated art collection that had cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But instead of the awe or calculation Marcus expected, her expression remained neutral, almost clinical, as if she were assessing a workspace rather than admiring luxury. "This is beautiful," she said simply, then added with gentle honesty, "but it doesn't feel like people actually live here." Emma nodded vigorously. "That's what I always tell Daddy. It's too clean. Mommy used to say houses should look like people are happy in them, with books lying around and dishes in the sink and pictures everywhere. But after she died, Mrs. Patterson made everything perfect again, and now it just feels like a museum." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. The criticism stung because it was accurate. He'd intentionally maintained the penthouse's pristine appearance as a way of controlling at least one aspect of his chaotic emotional landscape. Mess felt dangerous now, disorder too reminiscent of the way cancer had systematically destroyed the life they'd built together. But seeing his home through Bella's eyes, he recognized the sterility Emma had been trying to articulate for months. The kitchen proved even more overwhelming than the foyer. Bella stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking in the professional-grade equipment that remained largely unused since Sarah's death. The Viking range gleamed untouched. The marble island stretched empty except for a few pieces of mail and Emma's school artwork held by refrigerator magnets worth more than most people's jewelry. "May I?" Bella asked, approaching the stove with something approaching reverence. At Marcus's nod, she turned one of the burners, watching the blue flame spring to life with satisfaction. "It's been 8 months since I've cooked on anything better than a hot plate at the shelter." She turned off the flame and opened the massive refrigerator, revealing shelves stocked with organic produce, expensive cheeses, and gourmet prepared foods that no one had touched. "We have everything," Marcus said, feeling compelled to explain the abundance. "I keep buying groceries, thinking Emma will want something, but she barely eats anything. Dr. Hoffman says it's psychological. She's looking for emotional connections to her mother through food. But I don't know how to cook anything that would create those associations." Bella pulled out the leather-bound recipe book and set it carefully on the marble island. Under the kitchen's bright lighting, Marcus could see the cover was more worn than he'd initially noticed, with water stains and scratches that spoke of heavy use and difficult circumstances. But the craftsmanship underneath was unmistakable. This was quality leather, the kind that aged beautifully when cared for properly. "Before we do anything else," Bella said, looking directly at Marcus, "I need you to understand something. I'm not here because I want anything from you. I'm here because Emma asked, and because something about your story reminds me of my own." She opened the book to a page near the beginning, revealing Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. "This book was given to me by a woman named Sarah Williams. She was dying at Mount Sinai Hospice, and I was volunteering in the kitchen, learning to cook for people who had lost their appetites to illness and medication." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. "Sarah Williams was my wife." "I know." Bella's voice was gentle but firm. "She talked about you constantly, about Marcus who built something beautiful from nothing, who loved her so completely that he couldn't see how scared she was of leaving you and Emma behind. She was worried you'd both starve emotionally after she was gone, that you'd forget how to nurture yourselves and each other." Emma climbed onto one of the kitchen stools, positioning herself between the two adults with the unconscious authority children possess when adults are discussing important matters. "Did Mommy really talk about us? What did she say?" Bella turned to face Emma fully, treating the question with the seriousness it deserved. "She said you were the smartest, bravest little girl she'd ever met, but that you felt things so deeply it sometimes scared her. She worried you'd blame yourself for not being able to keep her healthy, and she made me promise something." "What?" Emma whispered. "She made me promise that if I ever met her family, I'd teach you her mother-in-law's recipes. She said Eleanor's cooking had saved your daddy when he was a little boy and his father left, and that maybe those same recipes could save you too, when you needed them most." Marcus gripped the edge of the marble island, his knuckles white with tension. The story aligned perfectly with what he remembered of Sarah's final weeks, her obsession with preserving family traditions, her insistence that he learn to cook simple meals, her mysterious disappearances to volunteer work that had seemed like denial of her worsening condition, but it also raised impossible questions about timing, coincidence, and the kind of cosmic design his rational mind rejected. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" he asked, hating himself for the suspicion in his voice but unable to suppress it entirely. "How do I know you didn't just research our family online and create this story?" Bella nodded as if she'd expected the question. She flipped to a page near the back of the book, revealing a loose photograph tucked between the pages. The image showed Sarah in her hospice bed, thin but smiling, her arm around a younger woman with blonde hair pulled back in a kitchen hairnet. Both women were laughing at something outside the frame. "She insisted someone take this picture," Bella said, sliding the photograph across the marble surface. "She said you'd need proof someday that the recipes had found their way to the right person." She paused, studying Marcus's face as he examined the image. "She also said you'd be suspicious because you love Emma too much to trust easily, and that I should be patient with your questions because protecting your daughter is the most important thing you do." Emma leaned over to look at the photograph, her eyes widening as she recognized her mother's face. "That's really Mommy," she said with wonder. "She looks happy. She didn't look happy very much at the end." "She was happy when she was teaching," Bella replied. "She said cooking for other people, even when she couldn't eat much herself, reminded her that she still had something valuable to give. That's when she told me about Eleanor's soup, the one that could heal hearts as well as bodies." Marcus set down the photograph with trembling hands, his skepticism warring with hope and desperate need. The evidence was compelling but not conclusive, the story both incredible and entirely consistent with Sarah's character. But Emma had moved to stand beside Bella, looking up at her with trust and anticipation that hadn't been present since before Sarah's diagnosis. "Could you make the soup?" Emma asked. "The one that heals hearts? I think mine might be broken, and Daddy's definitely is." Bella opened Eleanor's recipe book to a page marked with a faded ribbon, her fingers tracing the handwritten words with reverent care. "Eleanor's healing broth," she read aloud, then looked up at Emma with gentle seriousness. "But before we start cooking, I need you to understand something important. This isn't magic soup that will make your sadness disappear. It's just food made with love and intention. The healing happens because we cook it together, because we remember the people who cared about us while we're making it." Emma nodded solemnly, climbing down from her stool to wash her hands at the kitchen sink without being asked. "Mommy used to say cooking was like praying, but with vegetables instead of words. Is that what you mean?" "Exactly what I mean," Bella replied, surprised by the child's intuitive understanding. She began gathering ingredients from Marcus's well-stocked refrigerator: carrots, celery, onions, fresh thyme, and a whole chicken that probably cost more than she'd spent on food in the past month. Each item she selected with the same careful consideration a painter might choose colors for a masterpiece. Marcus watched from the kitchen doorway, still grappling with the surreal nature of his evening. 3 hours ago, he'd been a desperate father leaving another unsuccessful therapy session. Now a stranger was preparing to cook with his grandmother's recipes in his unused kitchen, while his daughter displayed more engagement and hope than he'd seen since Sarah's death. The rational part of his mind insisted this was moving too fast, that he was being reckless with Emma's emotional safety. But another part, the part that remembered being a hungry boy himself, recognized something authentic in Bella's manner. "The secret to Eleanor's broth," Bella explained as she began washing vegetables, "isn't any special ingredient. It's the way you prepare everything with complete attention. Eleanor lived through the Great Depression, when wasting food meant your family might go hungry. She learned to coax maximum flavor from the simplest ingredients because that's all she had." She handed Emma a small paring knife with a careful grip demonstration. "Can you help me peel these carrots? We need them cut exactly 1/4 inch thick." Eleanor said precision was the difference between surviving and thriving. Emma accepted the knife with the gravity of someone receiving an important responsibility. Her small hands moved slowly but steadily, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she worked to match Bella's example cuts. Marcus found himself holding his breath, not from worry about the knife — Emma had been using kitchen tools safely since she was 4 — but from the intensity of focus on his daughter's face. This was the first time in months he'd seen her genuinely absorbed in an activity, rather than simply going through motions. As they worked, Bella began sharing stories that weren't in any cookbook, the oral history that accompanied Eleanor's written recipes. She told Emma about how Eleanor had learned to stretch a single chicken to feed 8 people by making broth first, then using every part of the bird for different meals throughout the week. How she'd grown herbs on windowsills during harsh Minnesota winters, creating tiny indoor gardens that provided both flavor and hope during the darkest months. "Your great-grandmother Eleanor was barely 20 when the stock market crashed," Bella said, showing Emma how to tie fresh thyme into neat bundles. She had 2 babies and a husband who'd lost his job at the railroad, but instead of giving up, she started taking in boarders and feeding them meals that made them feel like family instead of charity cases. That's how she learned that food could be medicine for loneliness as much as hunger. Emma absorbed these stories with the fascination most children reserved for fairy tales, but Marcus recognized them as family history he'd never heard before. His own memories of Eleanor were limited to her final years, when she'd lived with them during his early childhood after his father left. He remembered her gentle hands and infinite patience, but he'd never known the details of her hardships or how they'd shaped her approaches to cooking and caring for others. The kitchen began filling with the rich aroma of browning chicken and sautéing vegetables, scents that seemed to awaken the space itself. Marcus realized he'd never smelled his kitchen this way, alive with the complex layering of ingredients transforming into something greater than their individual parts. The professional equipment he'd purchased but rarely used finally served its intended purpose under Bella's experienced guidance. "Now comes the most important part," Bella said as she lowered the heat under the heavy stock pot. "We wait." Eleanor used to say that patience was the most crucial ingredient in any good broth. You can't rush the process of drawing flavor from bones and vegetables. It takes time for everything to give up what it has to offer. Emma climbed back onto her stool, positioning herself where she could see into the pot as it began its slow simmer. "How long do we have to wait?" 3 hours minimum, Bella replied. Eleanor would let it cook all day sometimes, adding water when needed, tasting and adjusting. She said the best broths were the ones that had time to think about what they wanted to become. The extended timeline created an unexpected intimacy in the kitchen. With the soup requiring only occasional attention, the 3 of them settled into a rhythm of conversation and companionable silence. Marcus found himself actually sitting at his kitchen island instead of standing restlessly by windows or pacing between rooms. Emma remained engaged throughout, asking questions about ingredients and techniques, but also beginning to share memories of cooking with Sarah, precious recollections Marcus hadn't heard her express since the funeral. "Mommy used to let me crack the eggs," Emma said at one point, stirring the broth carefully with a wooden spoon almost as tall as she was. "But I always got pieces of shell in the bowl, and she'd have to fish them out with a bigger piece of shell." She said it was like surgery, but funnier. Bella smiled at this, adding her own memory. "Sarah told me about the eggshells. She said you were so proud to help that she started keeping a special bowl just for your eggs, shell pieces and all. She'd strain them later when you weren't looking because the helping was more important than the perfect result." These shared recollections of Sarah created bridges between past and present, allowing Emma to remember her mother's laughter without the overwhelming sadness that usually accompanied such memories. Marcus watched his daughter's face soften with each story, the tight lines of chronic grief relaxing into something approaching peace. As the broth continued cooking, Bella pulled additional recipes from Eleanor's book, showing Emma techniques for making simple bread and explaining how different herbs could change the character of basic dishes. But she also shared more personal stories, her own childhood, learning to cook from her grandmother in Baltimore, her culinary school dreams, the restaurant career that had ended so catastrophically when Vincent Carlucci stole her signature recipe and destroyed her reputation. "I thought I'd never cook professionally again," Bella admitted as she adjusted the seasonings in the pot. "But being here tonight, sharing these recipes with you, it reminds me that cooking isn't really about restaurants or recognition. It's about feeding people you care about and keeping traditions alive." Marcus found himself studying Bella's profile as she worked, noting the way her hands moved with unconscious grace, the gentle patience she showed with Emma's endless questions, the careful attention she paid to every detail of preparation. There was something both broken and resilient about her, a combination of vulnerability and strength that reminded him of Sarah during her illness, determined to give everything she had while she still could. When the broth was finally ready, Bella ladled it into simple white bowls, the golden liquid steaming with promise. She garnished each serving with fresh herbs and a small piece of the tender chicken that had given its essence to create the healing base. The kitchen fell silent, except for the gentle clink of spoons against ceramic as the three of them tasted Eleanor's creation together. Emma took her first spoonful slowly, her eyes closing as she processed flavors that were both new and familiar. When she opened them again, tears were streaming down her cheeks, not the bitter tears of grief, but something softer and more complex. "It tastes like Mommy's hugs," she whispered, then took another spoonful without hesitation. For the first time in months, she finished an entire bowl without coaxing or bargaining, her small body relaxing as nourishment and comfort worked their quiet magic. Marcus tasted his own portion and felt something crack open in his chest, not the sharp pain of fresh grief, but the gentler ache of healing beginning. The broth carried flavors he remembered from childhood, comfort he'd thought was lost forever with Eleanor's death decades ago. 3 weeks had passed since that snowy December evening when Bella first entered their lives, and the penthouse had undergone a transformation that went far beyond mere decoration. The sterile perfection Marcus had maintained since Sarah's death had given way to the comfortable chaos of actual living. Recipe books scattered across the kitchen island, Emma's artwork taped to cabinet doors, the lingering aromas of daily cooking replacing the antiseptic emptiness that had defined their home for 2 years. Emma had gained 8 pounds, her cheeks filling out as her appetite returned with remarkable consistency. More importantly, she'd begun sleeping through the night without the nightmares that had plagued her since Sarah's funeral. Dr. Hoffman had expressed cautious optimism during their last session, noting Emma's improved mood and renewed interest in future plans, something the child hadn't demonstrated since her mother's diagnosis. But the most profound changes were subtler, woven into the fabric of their daily routines. Marcus found himself working from home more frequently, drawn by sounds he'd forgotten he missed. Emma's genuine laughter echoing from the kitchen, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables, conversations about something other than grief counseling and medical appointments. The house felt inhabited again, warm with the kind of domestic contentment he'd thought permanently lost. Bella had settled into their lives with an ease that both comforted and unsettled Marcus. She never presumed upon their hospitality, maintaining careful boundaries even as she became increasingly essential to their daily happiness. She slept in the guest room, but rose early each morning to prepare breakfast, treating the kitchen like a sacred space where healing happened one meal at a time. Her presence felt natural, yet temporary, like a beautiful season that couldn't possibly last. The evening routine they'd developed centered around dinner preparation, with Emma as eager apprentice and Marcus as increasingly competent sous chef. Bella taught them more than cooking techniques. She shared the philosophy behind Eleanor's approach to food, the way simple ingredients could become expressions of love and care when handled with proper attention and intention. Cooking isn't about following recipes perfectly, she explained one evening as they prepared Eleanor's famous pot roast, Emma carefully measuring herbs while Marcus wrestled with proper knife technique. It's about understanding what each ingredient brings to the dish and how they work together to create something better than any of them could be alone. Marcus caught the metaphor's deeper meaning, recognizing how their small family unit had achieved a harmony none of them had possessed individually. Emma had found the maternal figure she'd been desperately seeking. Bella had discovered a place where her skills were valued and needed, and he'd begun to remember what it felt like to anticipate coming home, rather than simply enduring the hours between work obligations. But beneath the domestic tranquility, tensions were building that Marcus couldn't ignore. His board members at FoodLink had begun making pointed comments about his reduced office hours and increased working from home. Patricia Wellington, his lead investor, had scheduled a lunch meeting for the following week with an agenda that promised uncomfortable questions about his personal distractions and their potential impact on company performance. More troubling were the curious glances from neighbors and building staff, the way conversations quieted when he entered the elevator with Bella and Emma. Manhattan's social circles were small and gossip-prone, particularly regarding wealthy widowers and their household arrangements. Marcus knew it was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots between his obvious happiness and the mysterious woman who'd appeared so suddenly in their lives. The building's head concierge, James Morrison, had already made several pointed observations about additional residents and building policies regarding long-term guests. While not explicitly threatening, these comments carried implications about documentation, background checks, and the kinds of scrutiny Bella probably couldn't withstand given her recent homelessness and lack of traditional employment history. Emma remained blissfully unaware of these adult complications, living fully in the present happiness of having Bella's constant attention and guidance. She'd begun referring to Bella as my cooking teacher to school friends, carefully avoiding more loaded terms like nanny or housekeeper that might invite unwelcome questions about their family arrangement. One evening, as they cleaned dishes together after a particularly successful attempt at Eleanor's apple pie, Emma voiced the question Marcus had been dreading. "Bella, are you going to live with us forever?" she asked, with the directness only children possess. "Because I really hope you are. I like having someone who knows how to make food taste like love." Bella's hands stilled on the dish towel she'd been using to dry their good china. Marcus watched her face carefully, seeing the conflict between honest affection for Emma and realistic assessment of their impossible situation. A homeless woman couldn't simply move in with a billionaire and his daughter without consequences, social, legal, and personal complications that grew more complex with each passing day. "I don't know, sweetheart," Bella replied carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make decisions based on what's best for everyone, not just what would make us happiest." "But this is what's best," Emma insisted with 7-year-old logic. "You're helping Daddy remember how to smile, and you're teaching me Mommy's family recipes, and you're not sad anymore when you think we're not looking. How could anything else be better than that?" Marcus felt the weight of Emma's reasoning, recognizing the truth in her childish wisdom while simultaneously understanding the adult complexities she couldn't grasp. Their arrangement couldn't continue indefinitely without formal structure, but any attempt to formalize it would invite exactly the kind of scrutiny they'd been avoiding. That night, after Emma had gone to bed clutching the stuffed bear Bella had mended on her first evening with them, Marcus found Bella standing at the living room windows overlooking Central Park. Snow was falling again, lighter than that first evening but carrying the same sense of possibility and change. "She asked you about staying," Marcus said, joining her at the window. "She's a perceptive child," Bella replied without turning around. "She knows something has to change soon." Children always sense when adults are avoiding difficult conversations. "What do you want to happen?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with the directness of the question. Bella was quiet for so long he wondered if she'd chosen not to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability he hadn't heard before. "I want to stay," she admitted. "I want to keep teaching Emma and cooking in your beautiful kitchen and pretending that someone like me could belong in a life like this. But wanting something doesn't make it possible." "I've learned that lesson the hard way." "What if we could make it possible?" Marcus asked, the question emerging before he'd fully considered its implications. "What if there was a way to make this work legitimately?" Bella turned to face him, her expression mixing hope with skepticism. "How? I'm nobody, Marcus. I have no money, no job, no references that don't come with stories about mental breakdowns and stolen recipes. What you're suggesting sounds like charity, and I've had enough of charity to last several lifetimes." "It wouldn't be charity," Marcus said, his mind already racing through possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. "It would be partnership." The photograph appeared on page 6 3 days after Marcus had begun formulating his partnership proposal. The image was grainy but unmistakable. Marcus, Bella, and Emma walking hand in hand through Central Park, looking for all the world like a complete family. The headline made Marcus's blood run cold. "Tech Billionaire's Homeless Lover, Charity Case, or Gold Digger?" The article was vicious in its assumptions and devastating in its reach. Within hours, it had been picked up by gossip blogs, business journals, and social media platforms where strangers felt entitled to dissect their private lives with surgical precision. The comment section read like a catalog of society's cruelest judgments. Classic manipulation tactics, using his grief and the kid to secure her position. How long before she's cleaning out his bank accounts? Marcus discovered the story when his phone began buzzing with calls from board members, investors, and reporters at 6:30 in the morning. Patricia Wellington's message was particularly pointed. "Emergency board meeting, today, noon. Be prepared to explain how your personal choices won't impact FoodLink's reputation and stock price." Bella found the article herself while scrolling through news feeds on Marcus's tablet, searching for breakfast recipes that might tempt Emma's still fragile appetite. She read it twice, her face growing paler with each paragraph, her hands beginning to shake as the full implications became clear. By the time Marcus found her in the kitchen, she was already packing her few belongings into the worn duffel bag she'd arrived with 3 weeks earlier. "Bella, wait," Marcus said, setting his phone aside to focus entirely on her panicked preparations. "We can fight this. It's all speculation and gossip." "Look at me, Marcus," she replied, not stopping her systematic packing. "Really look. I'm a homeless woman living in a billionaire's penthouse, sharing meals and bedtime stories with his traumatized daughter. How do you think this looks to people who don't know our story? How do you think it looks to Emma's school, to your business partners, to Child Protective Services?" The mention of CPS sent ice through Marcus's veins. He hadn't considered that possibility, but Bella was right to worry. A social worker investigating their living arrangement would see exactly what the gossip columnist saw: an inappropriate relationship between a vulnerable child and an unstable woman with no official role in the household. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas, drawn by the tension in their voices. She took in Bella's packing with immediate understanding, her face crumpling into the expression Marcus had learned to dread over the past 2 years. "You're leaving because of the mean people in the newspaper," Emma said, her voice small and hurt. "You're leaving just like Mommy left, except this time it's because people are telling lies about us." Bella knelt to Emma's eye level, her own tears finally spilling over. "Sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices to protect the people they love. The things people are saying about me could hurt your daddy's business and make people ask uncomfortable questions about whether this is the right home for you." "But this is the right home for me," Emma insisted, her 7-year-old logic cutting through adult complications with devastating clarity. "I eat now. I sleep without nightmares. I remember Mommy without crying every day. How can that be wrong?" Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, watching his daughter articulate truths he'd been afraid to voice himself. Emma was thriving, genuinely healthy and happy for the first time since Sarah's death. Bella's presence hadn't been charity or manipulation. It had been salvation for his family in ways he was only beginning to understand. The emergency board meeting that afternoon proved every bit as brutal as Marcus had anticipated. The conference room at FoodLink's Manhattan headquarters felt like a tribunal, with Patricia Wellington presiding over a collection of stone-faced investors and executives who'd built their fortunes on careful calculation of risk and reward. The photograph was displayed on the main screen like evidence in a criminal trial. "Marcus, we've worked together for 7 years, Patricia began, her tone carrying the disappointed authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "In that time, you've shown exceptional judgment in business matters. That's what makes this situation so concerning. What were you thinking, bringing this woman into your home?" Marcus had prepared rational explanations. Bella's professional cooking background, her connection to Sarah's hospice work, Emma's dramatic improvement in health and mood. But facing the assembled disapproval of his business partners, these justifications felt inadequate, almost naive in their optimism. "I was thinking about my daughter," he replied simply. "Emma hadn't eaten a full meal in months. She was wasting away from grief, and nothing I tried helped. Bella changed that in a single evening." "By exploiting a child's vulnerability," interjected board member David Chen, sliding a folder across the conference table. "We had her background checked, Marcus. Isabella Morgan was fired from Le Bernardin for erratic behavior. She's been homeless for 8 months. She has no verifiable employment history, no references, no financial resources." "What exactly do you think attracted her to your family?" The background check made painful reading, a litany of professional destruction that began with Vincent Carlucci's accusations and spiraled into unemployment, eviction, and eventually life on the streets. Stripped of context and presented as pure data, Bella's story looked exactly like the gold digger narrative the media had constructed. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "our legal team has reviewed the potential liabilities. If this woman is injured in your home, if she makes claims about your relationship, if she attempts to establish common law marriage rights, the financial exposure could be enormous. And that's before considering the impact on Emma if this arrangement ends badly." Marcus realized with growing horror that his board wasn't wrong to be concerned. He'd allowed emotion to override his usual caution, making decisions based on hope rather than hard analysis. But he'd also seen Emma laugh every day for 3 weeks, watched her regain weight and confidence, witnessed her connection to family history through Eleanor's recipes. How could he weigh those intangible benefits against quantifiable business risks? "What are you recommending?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Distance yourself immediately," Patricia replied without hesitation. "Provide her with a generous settlement, enough to establish independent housing and job training. Make it clear this was temporary assistance, not a permanent arrangement. Issue a statement emphasizing your commitment to Emma's well-being and your continued focus on FoodLink's growth." The settlement offer was already prepared: $100,000 in cash, first-year rent on a decent apartment, enrollment in culinary school if she chose to pursue it. On paper, it looked generous, even noble. In reality, it felt like buying Bella's silence and Emma's heartbreak for the price of Patricia Wellington's approval. Marcus returned home that evening to find Bella finishing dinner preparations alone. Emma was in her room, ostensibly doing homework, but more likely hiding from the adult complications she couldn't fix with 7-year-old wisdom. The kitchen felt different without her chatter. Still warm from cooking, but somehow diminished, like a stage missing its most important performer. "How did the meeting go?" Bella asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "They want me to end this," Marcus admitted, setting the settlement offer on the kitchen island without opening it. "They're offering you money to disappear quietly." Bella glanced at the envelope but didn't touch it. "How much money?" "Enough to start over somewhere else. Enough to make this look like charity rather than whatever people think this is." "And what do you think this is, Marcus?" she asked, turning to face him directly. "What has the past 3 weeks meant to you?" The question hung between them, demanding honesty he wasn't sure he was brave enough to provide. What had started as desperation and Emma's intuitive trust had become something deeper and more complex. Not just gratitude for Bella's help with his daughter, but genuine affection for her strength, her wisdom, her gentle way of healing their broken family. "I think you saved us," he said finally. "I think Emma and I were drowning in grief, and you threw us a lifeline we didn't even know we needed. I think Eleanor's recipes found their way to you for a reason, and Sarah somehow knew you'd be exactly what we needed when we needed it most." Bella's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back all day. "But that doesn't change the practical realities, does it?" "I'm still nobody with nothing. You're still a public figure with a company to protect and a daughter whose future depends on your reputation remaining intact." Before Marcus could respond, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding the mended stuffed bear that had become her comfort object. She climbed onto her usual stool at the island, positioning herself between the two adults with the unconscious authority of someone determined to prevent a family crisis. "I heard you talking," she said, looking back and forth between them. "Are you going to send Bella away because people are saying mean things?" Marcus knelt to meet his daughter's eye level, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't fully articulate. "Emma, sometimes grown-ups have to make choices that protect the people they love, even when those choices don't feel good. Like Mommy choosing to stop fighting the cancer so she wouldn't hurt anymore?" Emma asked with devastating insight. The comparison hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sarah's decision to end aggressive treatment hadn't been about giving up, it had been about accepting reality while she still had time to say goodbye properly. Was he facing a similar choice now, between fighting impossible odds and protecting what remained of their family's stability? "Maybe," he admitted. "Maybe exactly like that." Emma considered this for a long moment, her young face serious with the weight of adult problems. Finally, she looked directly at Bella. "If you go away, will it keep Daddy and me safe from the mean people?" I hope so, sweetheart, Bella replied, her voice breaking slightly. That's what I'm trying to do. Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense to her, then surprised both adults by climbing down from her stool and walking to the junk drawer where they kept takeout menus and household odds and ends. She pulled out a piece of paper and a crayon, then began writing with careful concentration. "What are you doing, baby?" Marcus asked. "Writing a letter to Mommy?" Emma replied without looking up. "To tell her thank you for sending Bella to take care of us, and to ask her to help the mean people understand that sometimes miracles look like broken people getting fixed together." The letter Emma wrote to her mother that evening became the catalyst for everything that followed. Marcus found it the next morning on the kitchen counter, written in careful 7-year-old cursive with purple crayon on school notebook paper. "Dear Mommy in Heaven, the mean people in the newspaper don't understand that Bella is your present to us. They think she wants Daddy's money, but she just wants to make food that tastes like hugs. Can you please tell God to make them stop being mean? I don't want Bella to go away like you did. Love, Emma. P.S. Tell Grandma Eleanor we're using her recipes and they still work." Reading his daughter's innocent plea broke something fundamental in Marcus's resolve. All the rational business arguments, all Patricia Wellington's warnings about liability and reputation management, all his own fears about social judgment, none of it mattered more than the simple truth Emma had articulated. Bella had become family in ways that transcended legal definitions or social conventions. But Emma's letter also crystallized the impossible nature of their situation. A child's pure intentions couldn't overcome adult realities, the media scrutiny, the business pressures, the legal vulnerabilities that his board had cataloged with surgical precision. Marcus found himself trapped between protecting Emma's happiness and ensuring her long-term security, between following his heart and honoring his responsibilities as both father and CEO. The crisis deepened when Mrs. Patterson, their longtime housekeeper, arrived for her weekly cleaning to find photographers stationed outside the building and reporters attempting to interview building staff about the mysterious woman living in the penthouse. The elderly woman, who had worked for Marcus since before Emma's birth, was visibly shaken by the attention. "Mr. Anderson," she said, wringing her hands nervously, "they're asking all kinds of personal questions. About Miss Bella, about Emma's eating habits, about whether I've witnessed any inappropriate behavior. I told them nothing, of course, but they seem to know so much already." The realization that reporters were actively investigating their private lives sent ice through Marcus's veins. Emma's school would be next. Then her teachers, her friends' parents, Dr. Hoffman, every aspect of their carefully reconstructed life would be dissected for public consumption. The thought of Emma facing playground questions about her father's girlfriend and her own living situation made Marcus physically ill. That afternoon, Child Protective Services called to schedule a home visit. The social worker, Karen Phillips, explained with bureaucratic detachment that they'd received concerns from community members about Emma's welfare and living arrangements. The visit was voluntary, she emphasized, but refusal would likely trigger a formal investigation that could become far more intrusive. Bella overheard the phone call from the kitchen where she'd been teaching Emma to braid challah bread, continuing their exploration of Eleanor's holiday traditions despite the chaos swirling around them. When Marcus hung up, she appeared in his study doorway with flowers still dusting her apron and determination in her eyes. "I'm leaving tonight," she announced without preamble, "before the social worker comes, before this gets any worse for Emma. I won't be the reason that child gets put through a custody investigation." "Bella, we can explain." "Explain what?" "That a homeless woman with no legal standing moved into your house and started playing mother to your grieving daughter? That sounds reasonable to you?" Her voice carried bitter self-awareness rather than self-pity. "I've been fooling myself thinking this could work just because it felt right. But feeling right and being sustainable are two different things. Emma must have sensed the finality in their conversation because she appeared beside Bella, still wearing her child-sized apron, her hands sticky with bread dough. "You promised you wouldn't leave like Mommy did," she said, her voice small and accusatory. "You promised this was different." "This is different, sweetheart," Bella replied, kneeling to Emma's eye level for what felt like a goodbye conversation. "Mommy didn't choose to leave you. I'm choosing to leave because I love you too much to let my staying hurt you." "But leaving will hurt me," Emma insisted with 7-year-old logic that cut through adult rationalizations. "Leaving will hurt me more than anything the mean people can say." Marcus watched this exchange, feeling helpless in ways that wealth and influence couldn't remedy. All his resources, all his connections, all his ability to solve complex problems through strategic thinking, none of it applied to the fundamental injustice of their situation. Society had predetermined that someone like Bella couldn't belong in someone like his life, regardless of what they meant to each other or how well their arrangement actually worked. The doorbell rang at 7:30 that evening, interrupting their solemn dinner of Eleanor's pot roast, perhaps their last meal together as an accidental family. Marcus expected reporters or building management, but instead found his brother-in-law, Dr. Michael Chen, standing in the hallway, looking uncharacteristically serious. "Michael, what are you doing here?" "Sarah made me promise something before she died," Michael said, stepping into the foyer with the purposeful stride Marcus remembered from his medical training. "She made me swear that if I ever met the woman she gave Eleanor's recipe book to, I'd make sure you knew the whole truth about how that book ended up in her hands." Bella appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face paling as she recognized Sarah's brother-in-law. "Dr. Chen," she said quietly, "Sarah told me you worked oncology at Mount Sinai." "She told me about you too," Michael replied, studying Bella's face with the same clinical attention he'd once used to evaluate his patients. "She told me about a young woman who volunteered in the hospice kitchen, who had professional training but was working for free because she'd lost everything. She told me this woman reminded her of herself at that age, talented, determined, but carrying wounds that made her believe she didn't deserve good things." Emma had crept closer, sensing adult conversation that might affect her future, but not understanding its implications. Marcus lifted her into his arms, needing the comfort of her small body against his chest as much as wanting to protect her from whatever revelations were coming. "Sarah didn't just give Bella that recipe book randomly," Michael continued. "She researched Bella's background, learned about Vincent Carlucci's sabotage, even contacted other chefs who'd worked with both of them. Sarah was convinced that Bella had been systematically destroyed by someone who saw her talent as a threat." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. "What kind of research?" Michael pulled a manila envelope from his coat pocket. "Sarah was a journalist before she met you, Marcus. She never lost those instincts for investigation. When she realized she was dying, she used her remaining time to document everything she could about Bella's case. She wanted to make sure someone could clear Bella's name if the opportunity ever arose." The envelope contained photocopied articles, witness statements, even recorded conversations that painted a picture of systematic harassment and professional sabotage. Vincent Carlucci hadn't just stolen Bella's signature recipe, he'd orchestrated a campaign to destroy her credibility and employability in the culinary world. "Why didn't she give this to me directly?" Bella asked, her voice trembling as she examined evidence that could potentially restore her reputation. "Because she knew you were too proud to accept help," Michael replied gently. "She hoped someday you'd find your way to her family, and when that happened, someone would be able to help you fight back properly." Emma stirred in Marcus's arms, looking between the adults with confusion. Does this mean Bella doesn't have to leave? The evidence Michael had brought changed everything and nothing simultaneously. While Sarah's meticulous documentation could potentially clear Bella's name and expose Vincent Carlucci's systematic sabotage, It couldn't immediately resolve the crisis swirling around Marcus's penthouse. The photographer still waited outside, the board meeting was still scheduled for tomorrow morning, and Karen Phillips from Child Protective Services would still arrive in 48 hours to assess Emma's living situation. But Michael's revelation had planted something crucial in Marcus's mind. The recognition that running from this situation might be the coward's path, the easy choice that protected his business interests while abandoning the most meaningful relationships he'd built since Sarah's death. His wife had spent her final months gathering ammunition for a battle she knew she wouldn't live to fight, trusting that someone would eventually have the courage to use it. Emma had fallen asleep in Marcus's arms during Michael's explanation, exhausted by adult complexities she couldn't fully understand but deeply felt. As Marcus carried her to bed, she stirred enough to whisper, "Daddy, are you going to be brave like Mommy wanted?" The question haunted him as he returned to find Bella and Michael examining Sarah's documentation with the intensity of lawyers preparing for trial. Witness statements from other chefs described Vincent's pattern of targeting talented women. Financial records suggested embezzlement schemes, and recorded conversations revealed a calculating predator who viewed professional destruction as sport. "This is enough to destroy him," Bella said quietly, her voice mixing vindication with something like fear. "But pursuing this means going public, fighting back, making myself a target all over again. I'm not sure I'm strong enough for that battle." "You wouldn't be fighting alone," Marcus heard himself say before he'd consciously made the decision. "Sarah gathered this evidence because she believed in you. I believe in you. Emma believes in you. Maybe it's time we all stopped hiding from bullies and started fighting back." Michael smiled for the first time since arriving. "Sarah said you'd eventually reach this conclusion. She said Marcus Anderson never backed down from a fight when someone he loved was threatened, but that it might take him a while to realize love was what he was actually protecting." The next morning, Marcus walked into FoodLink's boardroom carrying Sarah's manila envelope and a strategy that would either save everything that mattered or cost him everything he'd built. Patricia Wellington and the assembled board members clearly expected capitulation, a chastened CEO ready to distance himself from scandal in exchange for corporate forgiveness. Instead, Marcus opened the meeting by sliding copies of Sarah's research across the conference table. "Before we discuss my personal life," he began, his voice carrying a steadiness that surprised him, "I think you should understand exactly who Isabella Morgan really is, and what was done to her by someone this company has been inadvertently supporting." The next hour transformed the narrative completely. Vincent Carlucci's restaurants had been major clients of FoodLink, generating millions in delivery fees while building their success on stolen intellectual property. The evidence Sarah had gathered didn't just vindicate Bella. It exposed a criminal conspiracy that made FoodLink an unwitting accomplice to systematic fraud. Patricia Wellington, to her credit, absorbed the information with the same analytical precision she applied to financial projections. "If this is accurate," she said finally, "we're not just looking at personal scandal. We're looking at potential criminal liability for our association with Carlucci's operations. Which is why we're going to do more than distance ourselves," Marcus replied. "We're going to lead the fight to expose him. FoodLink will remove his restaurants from our platform, support Bella's legal case against him, and make this company synonymous with protecting workers from professional predators rather than enabling them." The board members exchanged glances that mixed calculation with something approaching respect. David Chen leaned forward, his earlier disapproval replaced by strategic interest. "You're talking about turning a potential scandal into a corporate responsibility campaign." "I'm talking about doing the right thing," Marcus corrected. "The fact that it might also be good business doesn't change the moral imperative." By that afternoon, FoodLink's legal team was preparing lawsuits against Vincent Carlucci, while the company's PR department crafted a strategy that positioned Bella not as Marcus's inappropriate romantic interest, but as a whistleblower whose courage had exposed industry-wide corruption. The narrative shifted from billionaire's homeless lover to chef's fight for justice against systematic abuse. Karen Phillips arrived at the penthouse for her scheduled CPS visit to find not a chaotic household hiding secrets, but a family eager to share their story of healing and hope. Emma, coached by Marcus and Bella to tell the truth rather than hide it, explained with 7-year-old directness how Miss Bella had helped her remember how to eat and sleep and feel happy again. Isabella has been like a miracle for Emma, Marcus told the social worker, choosing honesty over deflection. Not because she replaced Emma's mother, but because she helped Emma connect with her mother's memory through family recipes and traditions. The eating disorder that had Emma's doctors worried for months disappeared within days of Bella's arrival. Philip spent 3 hours interviewing Emma privately, observing meal preparation and reviewing documentation of Emma's improved health and school performance. Her final assessment, delivered with bureaucratic caution, nevertheless carried unmistakable approval. This appears to be a stable household where the child's needs are being met appropriately. I see no reason for ongoing intervention. But the real transformation came that evening, when Vincent Carlucci made the mistake of responding to FoodLink's public accusations with a live television interview that revealed his true character. Faced with detailed evidence of his crimes, he chose attack over defense, launching into a misogynistic rant that ended his career more effectively than any lawsuit could have. Isabella Morgan was always unstable, he declared to a national audience, his polished facade cracking under pressure. She was obsessed with me, jealous of my success, willing to do anything to bring down someone who'd achieved what she never could. Now she's manipulating a grieving widower and his damaged child to get what she couldn't earn honestly. The interview backfired spectacularly. Within hours, #BellaStrong was trending across social media platforms as women shared their own stories of professional sabotage and workplace harassment. 7 other female chefs came forward with similar experiences, creating a class action case that would eventually send Vincent to federal prison for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy charges. Emma watched the vindication unfold with the satisfaction of someone whose faith had been justified by events. "I told you Mommy was helping from heaven," she said to Marcus as they prepared dinner together, all 3 of them, as had become their custom. She knew Bella needed our help, but she also knew we needed Bella's help. That's how families work, right? Everyone helps everyone else. 6 months later, Bella stood in the kitchen of her own restaurant, the Healing Kitchen, funded by Marcus, but owned entirely by her, preparing Eleanor's recipes for customers who came not just for exceptional food, but for the story of redemption and second chances that the establishment represented. The restaurant operated on a unique model. Paying customers funded free meals for food-insecure families, creating a community where economic differences dissolved over shared appreciation for cooking made with love. Marcus had proposed marriage on a quiet Tuesday evening while they prepared Eleanor's apple pie together, Emma flour-dusted and giggling as she attempted to roll perfect circles of dough. The proposal wasn't romantic in any traditional sense. No ring, no bended knee, just a simple question asked over pie crust. "Will you marry me and let's make this official, so Emma never has to worry about losing another mother?" Bella's acceptance came with tears and laughter, and the promise that they'd write their own recipes for marriage, combining Marcus's resources with her wisdom, his stability with her resilience, his love for Emma with her understanding of how broken things could be made whole again. Emma served as flower girl at their small ceremony in Central Park, held exactly 1 year after that snowy evening when 3 strangers had discovered they were meant to become family. Her speech at the reception, delivered with 7-year-old solemnity to an audience of friends, family, and formerly homeless individuals who'd found employment through Bella's restaurant program, captured the essence of their unlikely love story. Sometimes miracles look like regular people who are just brave enough to help each other when everything seems impossible.